Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Meet the 2021 Candidates for New York City Mayor. My name is Jose Ortiz Jr., and I'm the CEO of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. This morning, we have the pleasure of sitting down with Andrew Yang for the 10th and final of our scheduled conversations with the publicly announced candidates. A special thank you to our event co-sponsors and our workforce and training partners, the City University of New York, the Consortium for Worker Education, Jobs First NYC, the Literacy Assistance Center, New York Association of Training and Employment Professionals, and the Workforce Professionals Training Institute. Thank you to the members and partners that have joined us to hear from the candidate. NYCETC supports the workforce development community to ensure that every New Yorker has access to the skills, training, and education needed to thrive in the local economy, that every business is able to maintain a highly skilled workforce. NYCETC's membership is composed of nearly 180 workforce providers, education institutions, and labor management organizations to provide job training and employment services to nearly 600,000 New Yorkers, making us the largest city-based workforce development coalition in the country. Before we get started, all participants should know that you'll be muted for the duration of this call. Mr. Yang will be provided an opportunity to talk to us about his candidacy and answer some questions in a fireside format. I want to thank Mr. Yang for his leadership and for being here with us this morning. For some background on Mr. Yang, Andrew is a native of Schenectady, New York, and has lived in New York City since 1996. He earned a Bachelor of Arts from Brown University and a JD degree from Columbia Law School. Yang began his career in working in healthcare and education startups, including as CEO of Manhattan Prep and founder of Venture for America. After VFA received national attention in 2011, Yang was recognized by Champions of Change, a White House program under the Obama administration. In November of 2017, Yang launched a presidential campaign largely based on policy, including universal basic income. Yang's campaign ran through 7 Democratic primaries ending in February 2020. In March of 2020, Yang created Humanity Forward Foundation, a nonprofit organization that advocates for direct cash relief through large-scale bipartisan lobbying. In January, Yang launched his campaign to run for mayor of New York City in the 2021 mayoral election. Andrew, thank you for being here with us this morning. It's really good to see you. I want to begin by allowing you to expand on my introduction and tell us a little bit about yourself and your career in New York City.
Thank you, Jose. It's so great to be here with you all. Your organizations do something that I'm very passionate about, and I guess you'll get a sense why as I talk you through a little bit of what I've been up to the last number of years. So I showed up here as a 21-year-old law student, practiced law briefly, didn't like it, left to start a company that did not work out, and then worked at a series of growth companies, eventually became the CEO of an education company. Now, the education we were doing was not very heady stuff. Like, we were helping people do well on tests to get into professional schools, but there was obviously like a very heavy educational component. But it was a lot easier work than the work you all do, like a lot easier. And so I then left that company and then did something that was very hard, still probably not as hard as what you all do, but hard. So I started a nonprofit called Venture for America that connected recent graduates with early stage growth companies in both growth sectors and cities that were not doing well. So Detroit, New Orleans, Cleveland, St. Louis, places like that. And then when you have the rubber hit the road, then it's like, wow, like there's the stuff that you think works in theory. And then when you try to make it work in practice, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Then you're a nonprofit too, and you turn to your supporters and donors and be like, okay, like some of it's working, some of it's not, but we could use more money to do the things that are working. And so you wind up with a lot of fundraising pressure, honestly, and I think many of you can relate to that. A friend of mine said to me that nonprofits run on passion. And when you're the founder and CEO of a nonprofit, which I was for 6.5 years, then you're talking about the work and the vision and the values, but then like making the whole thing run is money. So you're always like, oh, like, where's the money coming from for this? And so you're doing this constant dance. And I appreciate the work you all do because I've done that dance for 6.5 years. And I concluded, and this is, just my conclusion, you don't need to, work with this necessarily, but I concluded that to make the economy actually work for the millions of people that it was leaving behind, we needed to do something very, very dramatic, like to start giving people money. which something that Martin Luther King advocated in 1967. And I was like, we totally should have done that. We should do that right now. How do we do that in real life? Well, someone would need to run for president on it. And then I was like, well, what are the rules for running for president? And so then I decided to run for president, which I think most of you saw. And when I decided to run, it was not considered wise, shall we say. But, I would say it's like the same impulse that led me to start that nonprofit too, which is, still thriving and active today. It's like, you see a problem, you want to solve it. And so many of you saw that problem in communities and you were like, look, we've got people, there are opportunities, we need to try and connect the two. And then when you get into the work, it's very, very difficult. Like, not everything works. We're talking about human beings, we're talking about real opportunities. And so sometimes like fits together perfectly, but a lot of time it doesn't. And so that's something I can relate to very directly. It's one reason why I appreciate you all so much. So you all probably know what happened with the presidential run. Didn't win, not president. But ended up energizing a whole movement around solutions. And that's what I'm all about. I'm about solutions. The fact that you all have connected thousands and thousands of people with both the skills they need to thrive and opportunities is awesome. And anything I can do to support that work, I'll do. We need a lot of it right now. We're down hundreds of thousands of jobs to the extent that there is like a need that's going unfilled for employers because we haven't given people the right connections or training, then we need to provide it. And if we do that, then it's going to help our city a great, great deal. So very thankful to you all for the work you do and really excited to be here.
Thanks again, Andrew. Thank you for that thoughtful response. It segues nicely into our next question. So as you know, New York City faces a massive labor market reallocation need. Estimated over 200,000 jobs will not return to the city at the end of the year due to the pandemic. And in response, many New Yorkers will need access to the training that provides new skills for a new economy. While President Biden has included $100 billion for workforce development in his proposed American Jobs Plan, $5.9 billion has been allocated to New York City along with $7 billion in federal education aid, both to be used by 2024. Given these conditions and assuming that the current administration doesn't allocate the resources to workforce development, what is the concrete action that you might take as mayor to connect our unemployed neighbors to training, upskilling, and job placement support that will connect them to good jobs?
Thanks, Jose. I certainly am hopeful that we get money that's expressly for this purpose, but in the absence of that, I think this would be a great place to invest because if you look at the federal aid we're getting, it lasts 2 years, and so you have to try and make it count. And if you can connect people to jobs that will thrive past 2022, 2023, then that's an enormous win. So if there are any programs that can help make that happen, we should invest. I don't have a concrete number in terms of how much the federal aid that we'd invest, but we would invest. Like if there's a solution that's working, we need to amplify it and augment the level of resources that are going to it.
Can you just expand a little bit more in terms of structure? So thinking about like, how does on day one, who will be in your administration, thinking about commissioners, parts of city government that fulfill the vision that you will lay out in the future. How does this work for you and how did you see this kind of rolling out?
I suppose technically it's under like the HRA, right? And Human Resources Agency, though that doesn't seem necessarily like where you would want it to start or stop. I would be open to having either a dedicated commissioner, certainly a deputy mayor who's responsible for workforce development. That makes sense to me. Like for better or for worse, I feel like I'm the sort of leader. Maybe you all can relate to this. You need to be able to look at someone and be like, hey, like you're responsible. What's going on with this? You know what I mean? And so I'd be very happy to have someone who is directly responsible for workforce development at either the deputy mayor level or the commissioner level.
Great, thank you. So obviously the pandemic has been especially hard on specific communities, Black and Brown, and more recently AAPI communities, not just been hit by the pandemic, but there's been issues with regards to historic disinvestment, marginalization, and obviously violence. How do you ensure that the communities that have been hardest hit by the pandemic are invested in an appropriate fashion over the course of your administration?
It's been a terrible time for a lot of communities. And the way to, this is really what the public sector is for, in my view, where you have like market forces that are going to exclude a lot of people. Unfortunately, typically people of color and women and certain communities and neighborhoods. So that's where we have to start. My big move in this space is to start a people's bank, which will then funnel hundreds of millions of dollars into minority-owned businesses and neighborhoods that are generally going to be bypassed or neglected by large commercial actors. And certainly that's going to help in the Asian American community. It's going to help in the Black community, the Latino community, like a lot of communities that right now may not recover the way that we need them to. There are other things we can do, but I'm a solutions guy, and like I think we just need to start investing resources directly. There's an opportunity among city contracts. I think the MWBE contracting program needs to be improved and honed, but also doubled. I think right now it's like 4.5%, something like that. It should be at least double that, and that would funnel hundreds of millions of dollars, even billions of dollars into various neighborhoods.
Thank you. So currently workforce is not particularly well integrated into economic development planning in the city, particularly around any investments and the incentives that are applied to some of these projects. Often they're built with little community input, and without a plan for how neighborhood residents will get jobs developed by the project. So essentially, how do we build a pipeline before these jobs come online? And so what do you see as the most effective and concrete ways to integrate workforce into recovery infrastructure projects, as well as the broader economic development system, including the role of local community-based organizations?
Well, I think the best way to integrate it is that if you have a large infrastructure project, and I plan to have many of them, it's one of the ways that we can recover is by building, is that you build in a workforce development component into the proposal, the work, the requirements, and you say, look, like, what are we doing to onboard people maybe who are in that community to be able to participate in this rebuilding project or retrofitting or installation or whatever it is. Because let's say you're going to install a ton of solar panels, which we should do, then why not train some people in the community to do that? And then like after they do it there, then maybe they can do it someplace else. It seems very reasonable. And so this should be part of what we ask of the folks who are doing building, is like when you talk about building, they should be helping us build skills too, build capacities. And ideally, you have folks who are directly in that neighborhood or community who are able to benefit.
As you know, the providers and nonprofit organizations, especially those on this call today, are especially aware of this particular issue. But the city's workforce development RFP process has been fraught with contracts that frequently fail to cover the full cost of effective service delivery. In large part, this is due to the fact that providers' voices are often left out of the planning process. How do you plan to address this and improve this part of the system?
This is something that you can imagine I'd be passionate about, having been a nonprofit and a provider. And I know right now, as you get a certain amount of money, there are certain people that get the money and then they just subcontract it all out. It's like their job is to get the contract and then have a bunch of other someones do the work. Like that's, another issue is that the city is not very good at paying on time. So we'll improve on that. But I understand that nonprofits have like a certain degree of overhead and administration baked in, and that if you try and ring every nonprofit for like every last dime, it's very hard for that nonprofit to actually become more sustainable, well-developed, be able to hone its practices. You don't necessarily want to be driving at cost, like in this space. I think you can all sense, like, I run a nonprofit, so I understand, I'd like to give you what you need as opposed to what we think you need.
So thank you for that. And so we're going to head into just a few questions that are in a kind of rapid fire format. So a simple yes or no is fine, but feel free to elaborate as well. We certainly have some time to do so. Our first question is, Mayor de Blasio is committed to fully funding the indirect cost rate initiative for FY 2022. Do you commit to continuing this investment in supporting strong nonprofit community and partnerships?
Yes. No, you can tell I believe in the nonprofit community, and I think this is a great way to signal that we're going to invest. I think nonprofits do a lot of things, frankly, better than the government's going to do them.
Great. Are you committed to streamlining and strengthening the oversight of the workforce development system? And you mentioned this earlier, by creating a new deputy mayor of workforce development, economic development, and housing, empowered to oversee all allocated funds and ensure workforce development is well integrated into the city workforce development system, growth, and strategy.
So I'm very, very open to the principle. I would probably separate out housing. So if there's like a deputy mayor of economic development, for sure, and combined with workforce, that. But I'd probably put housing in another bucket because it's kind of frankly ginormous.
Fair enough. Do you commit to creating a flexible and dedicated workforce development fund that can provide sustainable long-term funding for employment and training programs across all agencies and initiatives?
Yeah, I love this idea.
Great. Should the minimum wage be raised annually?
I think the minimum wage is too low. I'm not sure about the mechanics in terms of like whether it should be raised annually, but it's too low and it should be raised.
Great. And we have a couple more before we head into our partner questions. Should gig workers be employees with all rights?
Yes, I want to create a portable benefits fund. The reality is that full-time employment with contracts and benefits and all that stuff is like more and more a thing of the past, unfortunately. So we have to get our arms around that. It's not entirely a thing of the past. I mean, I want employers to fulfill their obligations, but we also have to face facts that a lot of people are not going to be in that bucket. And so we have to try and provide for them.
Right. Do you commit to having at least 10% of all funds allocated for economic development initiatives be allocated for the sole purpose of building a quality neighborhood-based talent pipeline in partnership with the city's workforce development initiatives?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. So we're now going to just head into a few questions from our partners. Our first question is going to be from Ira. Ira is the executive director at the Literacy Assistance Center. Ira?
Ira, you help people read? That's so dynamite.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Yang. Today in New York City, there are more than 2.2 million adults who lack English language proficiency or a high school diploma. Many of these New Yorkers have been on the front lines of the pandemic performing essential work. Others have lost their jobs and face a harsh reality without that income. Census data show that median wages for adults with a high school diploma or its equivalent are 24% greater than for those without a diploma, and immigrants who speak English very well are half as likely to live in poverty. Higher levels of literacy are associated with greater health knowledge and use of healthcare services, and the National Institute for Health stated that a mother's reading skill is the greatest determinant of her children's future academic success, outweighing other factors such as neighborhood and family income. While adult literacy education is only one part of the solution, it'll be essential to a just and sustainable recovery. Yet city and state funding for adult literacy education is so limited that fewer than 4% of the 2.2 million adults in need are able to access classes in any given year. So my question for you is this: as mayor, what percentage of these 2.2 million adults will you commit to providing funding and classes for?
Wow, so fascinating. I'd like to get them all. I mean, it's totally sensible to me. It would have an intergenerational impact. I'm Asian American, and you know that. Like, if you look at the communities that are struggling with English language literacy, it's very significant in our community. So I'd love to invest in these programs. It's very smart. Thank you for doing this work. It's not something that a lot of people think about, but anyone who wants to learn to read English, we should help them do so. I'm a fan of this project. I'd like to help our kids read by second grade too. I mean, like less than half can read now out of public schools. It's nuts. Though I shouldn't say that too loud because I've got a kindergartner and he can't read yet. So who knows, maybe by the time in second grade, I'll be like, it's okay. I don't know, is that too personal? I don't know.
No, that's great.
That's great, and it's fantastic. What I'm hearing you commit to is increasing funding by 25 times. So that's very exciting to hear. Thank you very much.
So I mean, sorry, like I'll commit to increasing investment in this space. Maybe not a 2,500% increase, but an increase in this space.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ira. Our next question is from Justin Collins. Justin is the Assistant Director of the Workforce Field Building Hub at the Workforce Professionals Training Institute. Justin, you're up.
Hi. The workforce development community has had to rapidly pivot in response to COVID-19 and a rapidly changing economy. One of the most critical issues is the increasing importance of digital access and digital fluency for both job seekers and the workforce providers that serve them. You've spoken about the need to invest in digital access and digital literacy for workers, but what are your plans for investment and capacity building to help workforce providers develop the digital infrastructure and gain the digital fluency needed to properly equip job seekers for an increasingly high-tech future and really present?
Yeah, I want everyone to have broadband at home. And it's something that to me is anti-poverty. I want to be the anti-poverty mayor. Workforce development is a big part of that. Broadband is one of the prerequisites in some cases. So I've looked at the numbers, and as usual, it costs money. so that you have 29% of New Yorkers who don't have high-speed internet at home. Of them, maybe half really want it, but don't adopt it. The other half have smartphones with data plans, or aren't really interested in this way. And so we need to invest. I've committed $100 million to help subsidize connecting. What's interesting is 99% of households are wireable. In other words, like the building's connected, the neighborhood's connected, et cetera, et cetera. It's just right now the telcos or the internet service providers just don't think they can make money off of this set of households. And so we have to bring them to the table and say, look, you have licenses to do business here that generate billions of dollars in revenue for you. So guess what? You're going to help us connect some people because those licenses get renewed every 2 years. And so the city's going to put down $100 million. And we would like you to match that at least, and then also subsidize plans for certain individuals. And then we'll tailor it so that it's not like 100%, what you're selling to other people, but it will do the job for anyone who wants to try and get a job or have their kid learn within certain hours. And that to me is like a crucial investment, because we have to allow you all to be able to access folks to be able to do your work.
Thanks, Andrew. And thank you, Justin. Our next question is from Roman Jackson. Roman is the Vice President of Jobs First NYC. Roman, you're up.
Thank you, Joey. And good morning, Andrew. Thank you for joining us today. My question is focused on out-of-school, out-of-work young adults who have historically been left out of recovery plans during previous economic downturns. Prior to the pandemic, there were over 118,000 out-of-school, out-of-work young adults in New York City. For those that were working, 61% were in part-time jobs. These numbers have drastically increased in the last year. What is your economic recovery plan for young adults, particularly those who were already experiencing barriers to economic opportunities before COVID-19?
This stuff, it's mission critical for us. One thing that I've done is announce the expansion of summer youth employment, which does go up to a certain age range. I'm looking for a very enormous expansion where we want to take it from 75,000 to 175,000. But that does not address the central problem, because obviously it's just the summer. It'll only apply to a certain subset of people. And what I would love to work with any organization that's helping connect this population to either part-time opportunities or full-time or training. Because if you're out of school and out of work, it's a recipe for trouble of one kind or another, either trouble for that individual, like the vast majority of the time, but eventually, like, it can result in very significant social costs. So this is something that, to me, it's just smart to try and invest in connecting more of these people and getting them into environments where they'll have some kind of opportunity or path forward. And I imagine that your organization is doing this kind of work, but this is a crucial population. It's like they'll go from being like kind of disconnected young adults to like disconnected not so young adults, you know, like it's like we have to try and do everything we can to help them now.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Roman. Our next question is from Clayton Banks. Clayton is the co-founder and CEO of Silicon Harlem. Clayton, you're up.
I think I know Clayton. What's going on, Clayton?
Good to hear you and good to see you, Andrew Yang. And let me tell you, this organization that's putting this together is tremendous. So we all got to support Jose and the whole team. My question, and this is a little off the cuff, as you look towards the future, not only being the mayor, but just a New Yorker in general, we're talking a lot about what's called smart cities, or in some cases, I like to call it tech-enabled cities. So right now we're hearing from the president, the governor, the mayors, and everywhere around the country about infrastructure. So a two-part question. One, do you believe broadband is part of infrastructure? And if it is, what does that mean? Do we treat it like a highway? And the second is, how do we prepare for that future where artificial intelligence and machine learning and all the things that are impacting the city to hopefully make life better? So I wanted to see what your agenda was around that.
Thanks, Clayton. Broadband should be infrastructure. As we can all tell, the Biden administration is starting to define infrastructure more and more broadly. so I think broadband's like a more natural fit than a lot of the other stuff, but I love it all. For sure, when you talk about treating it like the highway, that's interesting. Right now, there are obviously a lot of private actors in internet provision in a way that's not really true of the highways. But what we have to do is we have to make it seem like public utility in the same way that highways are. And that's one of our big goals. So if it is going to be private concerns making lots of money, then we have to be like, look, you're going to have to help us connect these people too. Like, you may not think it's worth your while, but it kind of is for a number of reasons. On the AI front, it is so interesting. I think a lot about this. And I want to try and make it so that AI is working to improve our lives in various ways, solving problems at the city level. I think there are massive opportunities around use of data to try and address some of our issues. And we have to try and design a city economy and a workforce to all the work you all are doing that can thrive in an era when technology is capable of doing more and more. It's going to be a massive challenge. Like, if most people don't know this, but technology has already completely transformed Wall Street, as an example. You know, there used to be like a good hundreds, thousands of people doing certain jobs, and now it's software and 50 engineers. And that's happening increasingly at accounting firms and even law firms to an extent. And this stuff is happening. So the city needs to try and make the city itself a beneficiary of this. And then make it so that more New York City workers are in position to benefit, and even potentially, to Clayton's work, like even design some of the software and the AI that we're hoping to implement. But I think about this a lot, Clayton, as you know, because the trend's here to stay. It's going to speed up. New York City in some ways is much more resilient because we have a very, very diverse economy that I'd love for us to take advantage of. We should be one of the winners if we do this right.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Clayton, for your question. Our next question is from Gary P. Jenkins. Gary is the HRA administrator of the Human Resources Administration. Gary, you're up.
Thanks, Joey.
You're the HR of the HRA? Is that like HR squared? That seems very, very elevated.
Thank you so much. Andrew, a question regarding bridge training. A lot of low-income New Yorkers are in need of this bridge training to obtain a sustainable job. City Council recently awarded $850,000 towards this effort for a pilot. I just wanted to know from you, if you become mayor, are you committed to investing in bridge training so these New Yorkers can get the jobs that they deserve?
I love that pilot. I would 100% invest in this. I love where it's going. And as we all know, 850,000 is not that big a deal in the scheme of what's happening in the city budget. So yeah, let's do it.
Thanks, Andrew. And thanks, Gary, for the question. Our next question is from Darlie Cornell. Darlie is the Education Director, Program and Operations at the Consortium of Worker Education, or CWE. Darlie, you're up.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, everybody. Andrew, nice to see you. You in your book, The War on Regular People or Normal People, you write about the need for many things, automation, and how it will change our work and the work system in the US. But one particular point that you make is how there is extreme need to invest in workforce development, placement and training, apprenticeship, entrepreneurship, tax incentive, and then you go to say that that still won't work for millions of people. As it is, we have many millions who have been already left out because of COVID and many other reasons. So what do you suggest to then address those millions left behind already are the one that will continue to be left behind in spite of implementing all these things? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for reading my book, Darlie. That really
My
makes me so
made
glad.
me read it. My ED forced us to read it.
Oh, thank you. It is pretty relevant for this crew, I gotta say. I don't know if you read it too, Jose. I'm a huge fan of investing in what you all do, but I think that there are going to be like hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers and millions of Americans that are left behind. And we're seeing it right now. I mean, like I just looked, like the labor force participation rate's down to 61.7%, which means that another 2.5 million people have dropped out, including far too many women and who aren't coming back to work in various ways. So I want to help you all do what you do, but I also want to try and help the people that are that we're going to miss. Because I know if you're doing this work, you know that you're helping connect what percentage of people that need it, like in your minds. It's not 100%, that's for damn sure, right? It's like it's a fraction of that. So most people know that my hope was that we would just start flooding the zone with economic resources, which I thought would end up creating opportunities even for people that organizations like yours were not accessing, and then maybe be able to connect more. But it's a huge concern of mine, Darlie. I want to augment the resources for what you all do. And then I want to help the people that we're going to miss, because I don't think anyone on this call thinks that we're going to get everybody.
Thank you, Darlie. Our next question is from Zoltan Boca. Zoltan, you're up. I don't see Zoltan. So we're going to head into our next question. Actually, Annie Garniva, our Vice President of Policy and Special Initiatives, is going to ask a question.
Actually, we just pulled Zoltan up.
Go ahead, Zoltan. All right, thank you.
Hi, hello, sorry about that. My question was that right now there's a disparity in minimum wages. And the disparity is such that there's a lower minimum wage for prison and other blue collar employees, like $2 an hour for waiters, waitresses, etc. Do you support a parity between different minimum wages, equalizing everything to 15 an hour?
Zoltan, the minimum wage is too low. It should be higher. I have not figured out what the impact would be of upping it entirely for service workers. I would need to talk to like restaurants and hospitality businesses and figure out like, what makes the most sense. But I'm all for, I think most people know, I'm all for paying people more, getting more money into people's hands, and the fact that the minimum wage is not livable in many contexts. Certainly this $2 an hour prison wage that you're describing seems like deeply immoral. That sounds very, very messed up. So I want to get more money into people's hands. I just don't know enough about the impact it would have on various hospitality businesses.
Thank you, Zoltan. I'm now going to pull up Annie Garniva, our Vice President of Policy and Special Initiatives. She's going to ask a couple of questions from the audience.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you. So my first question is around the connection between the climate crisis and workforce development. Of course, we all know that we're facing a very much an existential crisis in terms of flipping our grid to renewable systems, making sure that those systems are both accessible to environmental justice communities, as well as making sure that all of the investments that we make are connected to those environmental justice communities, as well as ultimately communities have been hardest hit by the pandemic. So as we gear up to make that transition, how do you plan on making the connection between, so how do you plan on both making sure that those jobs exist and expanding that sector in the city, as well as making sure that the communities that we work with, the communities that we've been talking about, have access to those jobs and careers?
Thank you, Annie. I think we referenced this a little bit earlier. One of the great opportunities, our city has a lot of challenges. Like we are not in good shape. But one of the great opportunities is getting billions of dollars in federal money to rebuild ourselves more sustainably, to be more resilient from climate change, and create jobs and train people for those jobs. You know, I talked about solar panels. You could talk about shoreline resilience and coastal resiliency projects. You could talk about trying to make municipal buildings, sustainable in different ways with like window fittings and other like painting roofs white. Like you could go on and on. And so this is one of the great sources of optimism. I think we're going to get billions of dollars from the feds. I think we're going to spend it on our city. I think we're going to create a lot of jobs. We're going to train a lot of people for those jobs, and hopefully solve a few problems at once. Not solve, make some problems less worse at once. And we're going to fight for that. I mean, I've got some relationships on Capitol Hill, and I have a number of people in Congress that want to get New York City that money. So let's go get that money, and then, then let's spend it on climate change resilience projects and train some people for them.
Couldn't agree more. And our final question comes from Martha Jackson, who is a disability rights advocate. So her question is around, with 80% jobless rate and a 35% poverty rate for New Yorkers with disabilities, we'd love to hear about your workforce development and training program agenda for the city's largest untapped talent pipeline.
Thanks for the question. I have a son who's autistic, and so I understand that we have to do more. I'm going to say a couple things. Like there are many people who are differently abled that would make phenomenal workers in different environments, and we have to do everything we can to identify those opportunities and connect them. And I want to do more. At the same time, I would want to accept a reality that for certain people, like like the market's not going to necessarily want this like nonverbal autistic person like in some role, and so we have to take care of people too. Just like in some case, like I want to connect people to opportunities, and I know there are a ton of people in the differently abled community that have a lot to offer. I would consider my son like sort of a future member of this category, honestly. But there are also people that we just need to take care of better.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank you to the audience and our partners for a wide range of questions that I think are incredibly applicable and important at this time. You heard about the critical issues in our community and across the workforce development sector. I'd like to give you a few minutes to make a closing statement before we wrap up.
Oh, really, thank you all for the work you do. I want to take anything you're doing that is working for people, for jobs, for the city. I want to be your partner. I want to augment those resources. We're going to need you. We're going to need you. And I hope you sense in me someone who wants to be a partner and champion, because I have some exposure to this space, and I know how difficult and important the work you're doing is. And so if you have programs that are delivering results, let's just like max them out. Let's just like plow resources into them until you're like, okay, we've done everything we can in this direction, and we find another opportunity to do the same thing. You can sense like, I don't think that we're going to magically solve a lot of these problems, but we're going to make the problems dramatically less severe for thousands and thousands of New Yorkers who will then have jobs and be able to provide for themselves and their families. And that's the best thing you can. And hopefully we'll have cause to celebrate some victories in the next number of years.
Thanks so much, Andrew. We appreciate that. Appreciate your statement, your answer to the questions, and for being here with us this morning. Again, thank you to all of our partners for helping us plan today and their participation in today's event. And thank you all for joining us this morning. Of course, once again, thank you. We'll see you soon and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Have a good